Welcome back to the Lakers Takes podcast. This is episode 4, and I'm your host, Edwin Garcia. Today, we're going to talk about the Lakers beginning the regular season 1 and 2. We'll break down the games, what happened on and off the court. We'll do a brief recap of the Lakers G League roster, and we'll take a look at the games coming up this week. Let's get into it. Alright, so the Lakers opened up the NBA season playing the Golden State Warriors. Again, that's a marquee matchup. The Lakers played the Warriors during the play-in, and of course they won on that incredible LeBron James 3 with one eye available. So obviously there's kind of a little bit of a rivalry, at least a little bit of recent history with Golden State and the Lakers. So great idea from the NBA to have them play. Unfortunately, it means a really tough game for both teams starting out the season, and that's what it was for the Lakers. We've already talked about their preseason struggles and figuring it out and getting the team together, and this game was kind of an example of all of that, the good and the bad, right? The Lakers started off pretty well, and they were in fact leading at halftime 59-53. LeBron was hitting his threes, AD was playing pretty good, Melo was doing all right, Russ had a rough time, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more here as this podcast continues, but he started off rough, but the team was still winning, and you felt like, wow, are the Lakers really going to win their first game after all the hoopla about preseason and everything? And are they going to still be, where they want to be? And it looked that way until we reached the third quarter. Then in the third quarter, the Warriors got a little bit of a mini run to close the quarter. They closed the quarter out on a 5-0 run. They hit some free throws, hit a basket. Russ had a really rough turnover to kind of end the quarter. Next thing you know, it's 85-83, and the Lakers are only up 2 going into the fourth, when they were up by as much as 10 in the middle of the third quarter. So the Warriors closed the gap, and they had a bad game up until then. They were sloppy with the ball, lots of turnovers. Steph didn't have a good game. The team as a whole was shooting very poorly from 3 up until that point. And again, in a scenario like this, one game, anything can happen. You had the Warriors on an off night. You got to take advantage. You got to close the door. But instead of closing the door, they left it slightly open, gave the Warriors a window, and a great team like the Warriors, they're going to find a way to win that game, and the Lakers found a way to lose. Steph Curry hit some more shots. He got a bit hot. He was a lot more active, scoring a lot more productively in the fourth quarter. Also, the time that Steph Curry was off and on the bench, Bjelica had 9 of his 15 points in the fourth quarter. So they really got everything they needed from everybody in that fourth quarter. They balled out. The Warriors scored 38 points to the Lakers 29, and the Lakers let this one go. They ended up losing 121-114, and it ended up being a disappointing night, and it was just, a sour taste in Lakers Nation's mouth of this result. And, there were some good takeaways. One of the good news is LeBron was ready. I mean, he came out, he was incredible. He had 34 points, 11 rebounds. He played in 37 minutes. He just looked so ready. 5 for 11 from 3, which, LeBron's not known for his three-point shooting, but man, oh man, was he incredible on opening night. And again, after all the hoopla of everything about what the preseason's been like, he came out, he showed, I'm still the most dominant player. I'm in the argument of being the best player in the league right now, and definitely no argument who was the best player this game. I don't think anyone could name anyone else except for LeBron James as the best player on either team on opening night. It was clear. The bounce, his move, his speed, his accuracy, his shooting ability. No one played better than LeBron on this night, and that's impressive to see on year 19. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. He had a phenomenal performance. Unfortunately, it wasn't a loss, but again, it's an 82-game season, and that's a great sign if you're a fan of LeBron James or the LA Lakers, that he's that good coming off of the very first game of the season. AD also had a pretty good performance. His season didn't end well last year. It was nice to see him have a good game. He had 33 points. He also had 11 rebounds. He had a team high 39 minutes, so he played a lot. He was active out there, and he looked pretty good. So that was another bright spot. Your two big top players played like big top players, so that was positive. One thing that wasn't positive was Russell Westbrook. It's been so widely debated. Should the Lakers have picked him up? Is it worth it? How will it work? Spacing, blah, 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 blah. Right? Constant talk about this, and this game did not help. 8 points on 4 for 13 shooting, four turnovers, which is not great, but not terrible. But he just looked bad. He just looked bad out there. He looked like a fish out of water. He did not play well, and it was disappointing. That's really the word for it. It was disappointing. I'm definitely a Russell Westbrook believer. He's an incredible talent. I'm not really nervous or worried at all. It is going to take some time to work it out and figure it out. It's a new system for him. It's a new scenario, being a third option instead of the first option, and he is a unique source of force of nature, really, and you have to kind of adjust to it, and they're going to figure it out. So I'm not too worried, but with all the talk and the questions you get from the media and the conversations on Twitter and the feeling he had to have knowing that LeBron AD played incredible, and I know he knows he didn't play well, and it was rough. So it was tough to see. It was a disappointing first game for Russ. And, I like some of the things LeBron said post game, talking about, hey, I told him not to be so hard on himself. Go watch a comedy. Relax, it's going to be just fine. And it will be just fine. It just looked bad for one game. And for the Lakers, it was disappointing to not close the door. If they go on a 5-0 run instead of the Warriors in those final couple minutes, maybe the Lakers finish the game early in the fourth, right? They would have had, a 13, 14 point lead going into the fourth. Maybe then, you're one run away from closing them out instead of the other way. So again, we could do this all day for any game. A couple of things swing momentum and change it, but it's just disappointing because it felt like the majority of the game they were the better team. But again, they gave the Warriors a window, and a team like the Warriors, you give them an opportunity to come back into a game, they're going to do it. And props to them. They handle their business. They're one of the top teams in the West for a reason. They're one of the teams everyone's looking forward to seeing and seeing how good they're going to be because of the kind of play that they had on opening night against the Lakers. And, hey, Lakers took the first loss of the season. It is what it is. All right, so for Game 2, the Lakers went on to play Phoenix. Again, this entire week was a Lakers-LA Staples Center week, so they were at home for all these games, but these games were brutal. Again, lost to Golden State 121-114, and then they went to face the Phoenix Suns, who, are the team that knocked the Lakers out in the first round, so there's definitely a lot of storylines and narratives with this game. How is Phoenix going to look? How are the Lakers going to respond? Is this their revenge game after what happened in the playoffs? And it started off pretty good. Again, the Lakers started pretty good. They went with the same starting lineup as the first game, which was Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Kent Bazemore, DeAndre Jordan, and Russell Westbrook. And that's a starting lineup that I think is a very Vogel starting lineup. You got two bigs, you got a defensive guard, and then, you have your stars in Russ and LeBron, so it makes sense. I know people have been, and that's been something we'll continue to talk about, people have not been excited about the starting lineup. They do not like DeAndre Jordan. Fans do not like the two big lineup. That's been really clear. But what's also really clear is Frank Vogel does, and he's the one in charge calling the shots, and he has his reasons, which maybe I'll get into in a little bit more. But anyway, that's how the first game started. That's how the game against Phoenix started. That was the starting five. And honestly, they started okay. They were leading 26-23 after the first quarter, and it was a back and forth quarter, but you felt like, okay, they're competing better. They're playing better. Russ is playing a little bit better. He couldn't really play worse than he did on that first game. So, but again, there's marginal improvement, and the energy's there, and the competitiveness of the team is right there. They're up 3 in a tight game against a really good team in the first quarter. And then the second quarter happened, and the team just exploded. They just absolutely exploded. The Lakers' worst version of themselves came out, and the Suns' borderline best version of themselves came out. They got active. They were scoring. Campaigns hitting threes. Chris Paul's mid-range is just on the point God level. Everything was going wrong for the Lakers. Turnovers, sloppy play, defensive miscues. Melo's getting cooked. Melo's getting targeted. CP3's asking for a screen from whoever Melo's guarding every single time, and he's killing him off his shot. DJ didn't look good in the moments he was in the second quarter. It was terrible. It was awful. The crowd was dead. The Suns were sparking and talking, and Chris Paul was, had words for, whoever was in the stadium and in the stands, and it was just starting to look ugly. Again, a 34-18 quarter, and it went from bad to worse as during that quarter, AD and Dwight Howard got into it. There was some pushing, there was some shoving, some words were exchanged. We don't have all the details, but essentially, if somehow you've missed it, Dwight Howard was near the bench and talking aggressively to AD, and AD was talking aggressively back. They were close to each other. A trainer kind of went in between them, said, hey, kind of separate, but it seemed like it was no big deal, just kind of a heated argument. And next thing you know, it went from, they're just kind of in each other's face a little bit, but it didn't look too bad, to, AD's pushing, Dwight Howard down to sit down, and then Dwight Howard's kind of resisting a little bit, and then he sits down because he's forced to sit down, and some furniture is moving around, and everyone's kind of gathering around and trying to break it up and knock it out. And it just really looked bad. It was a shocking thing to see because AD's not known for that kind of attitude. So it makes you really wonder what was going on. And it just looked bad. The team's getting their butts kicked, and this is happening. It looks like the team is falling apart. Now, I'm here to tell you that that's not how I think at all. It was just, Dwight Howard mentioned it post-game, that it was just an emotional moment. It's just two guys competing and holding each other accountable, and they got passionate, and that passion turned physical, right? And I believe that. Of course, they're not going to tell you if their locker room's falling apart on game 2. So I understand that, there is a good reason to lie. But honestly, when I saw it, I was more worried about, oh man, Twitter's going to have a field day, than I was, oh no, the team's, falling apart. I'm like, it's game 2. They're mad. They're emotional. They had a rough game 1. They lost game 1. Everyone's talking about them. And then they know they're going to get talked about even more getting cooked like this in game 2. And it's just, I think that frustration came out in that way. And, AD is not thought of as an aggressive person. He seems like he's more passive. But I've seen other games where, the media or the fans just didn't pick up on it. I've seen times where he calls LeBron out and LeBron calls him out back. And they've had those spats before. It was just a lot of times either heading to the bench, coming out of the bench, or I've seen it a few times in the middle of a game going back on offense where they've had those conversations. But it's really brief, and usually it's, the way I remember them going is usually AD calling LeBron out, and LeBron calling AD back out on something he wasn't doing and kind of challenging him on that. And then they squash it really quickly, which is why many people probably haven't picked up on it. But I've seen that a few times. So AD is known for actually, getting into a teammate. And sometimes those teammates, especially when you have, these big personalities on this team, especially lots of legends on this team, even if they're not maybe playing at that legend level today, they are legends in the game. And there's going to sometimes be those moments. I think Dwight put it really well, putting it in context that even though he wasn't part of this team, when they lost to Phoenix, they know they lost to Phoenix. They know that it's a game they want to win because it's a team that kicked them out. And then to perform like this, they were upset, and then that upset feelings turned into anger, turned into violence. So again, it wasn't the world's worst thing, but it definitely didn't look good. And it's something they definitely ideally you take the high road in those situations, and you argue, but you move on. And that's not what happened here. It got a little bit beyond that, and they said that it didn't matter, but, Dwight didn't come back in the game. And I think that's weird. There's not many games I think you're going to see this year, unless there's some kind of foul trouble or ejection or injury, that you're not going to see Dwight Howard in the second half. So I know they said that wasn't because of this there. I do kind of think, I think it was. I think it was, hey, just let him sit. Let's cool off, and we'll squash it. They said it's squashed. I'm going to believe them. And I think it was more of a big deal because it was seen in the public eye and the context of the loss, more so than, actually something Lakers Nation needs to worry about in terms of chemistry or anything. I don't think that's what it was. I think it was just two guys upset during a loss and took it out on each other instead of, redirecting that focus to what the task at hand was. So unfortunately, the Lakers got absolutely killed. They lost 115-105, so the game doesn't look that bad if you just look at the box score. But if you watch the game, it was a lot worse than that. The Suns' highest lead was 32 points, and that happened, I believe, during the third quarter. It might have been early in the fourth, but the Lakers did go on a run. Props to the Lakers for having the respect for themselves to at least cut the lead down, even if it wasn't garbage time or in that fourth quarter, with that Reeves rotation. Reeves came in a little bit here. He didn't play, I think, at all in the first game. And in the second game, he had a little bit more time. He played a full quarter, 12 minutes. And props to the Lakers for having pride in saying, we know we're going to lose, but we're at least going to cut it down so it doesn't look so bad on the box score. And they only lost by 15. They could have easily lost by 40 points. It could have gotten really ugly, but they stayed focused enough and had enough pride to finish the game out respectably. And hey, it was an ugly loss, but it could have been a lot worse. 115-105. You'll reluctantly take that. You don't really have much of an option because you lost the game. And, that's kind of the result after two games. And again, Twitter was, a buzz and the sky's falling. Everything's, the worst, right? This team doesn't work or make sense. But again, relax. It's game 2 of 82. It's a long season. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you these are good things. I'm just sitting here and telling you these are early things. And nothing that's happened in the last two games can't be fixed. I don't see this being an absolute disaster. We need more information. We need more time. We need to give these players more time to develop, to gel, to mesh. These were two really good teams. Give these teams credit. These are the Phoenix Suns. They're the Western Conference champions for a reason. They made the finals last year. Golden State Warriors are one of the favorites to make it that far this year. These are good teams. You're not going to beat every good team just because you want to. That team also wants to play. They have more. Both of those teams have more continuity, years together. Had better years last year. Well, except the Warriors, but they have players healthy, players back, players developing that have taken some steps forward this year. Obviously, they're going to get Clay back. So these teams are good. That's just my point. These are top teams in the Western Conference, some of the best teams in basketball. And I'm not surprised they lost it all. In fact, in my predictions video, those were the two predictions I had, that they would lose these two games. I'm not surprised at all. I'm not panicking. It was what I predicted. And you shouldn't panic either. That doesn't mean you can't be critical. You follow me on Twitter, you see I'm critical. When they're playing bad, you can say they're playing bad. Just don't catastrophize it. Don't say this team is done or something like that. Just say, hey, they're playing rough today, or it's a bad game, or today's bad. It's okay. But let's put it in context. Pump the brakes on any definitive, declarative statements on what this team is or isn't. We just don't know yet. We need way more data. I would say at least let's get to the first quarter of the year being done. Let's get to 21 games before we start to really feel convinced that we know anything. This team's very new. Only 3 players returned from last year. So it's going to take a while before we really see everything and really have enough data to feel comfortable kind of saying much, except for AD's really good and LeBron's really good. There still was one more game. So game 3 was against the Grizzlies. Lakers are down 0-2 in the season. And guess who comes to town? Ja Morant, who just cooked the LA Clippers and beat them the night before. I thought that would kind of, help the Lakers because a young team on a back-to-back. But the negative is it's a young team on a back-to-back, so they don't care. They're just, little bunny rabbits ready to play. And they came out and played pretty well. Ultimately, the Lakers won, 121-118. So the first Laker win after the longest week in NBA history, the first week of NBA season. The Lakers were able to pull it off. They got their first W, 121-118. It definitely wasn't an easy game. It did feel like the Lakers were in control most of the game. Even when they were down personally, I felt like the flow of the game was, okay, it's early. They'll pick it up. And in the first quarter, the Lakers were up 29-24. They extended their lead just slightly into halftime. And in the third quarter is when the Grizzlies were able to kind of keep it competitive and fight back into the game. Not that they were down by much. They were only... I think the biggest deficit before the third quarter was about 6 points or so. So it's not like they were ever really out of it. I think it was 10 points. 10 points in the third quarter was like the biggest gap they had. So they were never really out of it, but they would always make a run. They always made a bounce back, 2-3 minutes to kind of close a 10-point gap to 4 points to 6 points. They stayed around, but in the third quarter, they really got competitive. And heading into the fourth, they really came down to the final couple minutes. Again, Ja Morant is just... incredibly good at basketball. He had 40 points. He is going to be a future superstar. I don't think that's a hot take or a prediction at this point. I think it's kind of known. Personally, I liked Ja Morant even in college. He was from a kind of no-name school, but he was balling back then, and he balled out during the NCAA tournament, and he balled out his first season with the Grizzlies, and it looks like he's picking up and actually extending beyond that, which makes sense because he's a developing young player. And yeah, Ja Morant's really special. So with a player like Ja Morant, he's going to eat. You just hope he doesn't overwhelm you. And he still did, but you got the win, and that's really what matters. Prior to the game, Vogel was giving Bazemore all his flowers. He's such a great defender. He'll always be guarding the best wings and guards of any team we play. And that's what he did today, and he got absolutely cooked. He got absolutely torched against Ja Morant and the Memphis Grizzlies. But honestly, I don't think that's his fault. I think that happens to anybody. Ja Morant's just that good. So while Bazemore had a bad game, I'm not really going to blame him for that. It was a tough defensive assignment. But the Lakers pulled it off. They pulled off winning a good game against I think a good, solid playoff team. We'll see how high they can go, but I definitely think the Memphis Grizzlies are a playoff team this year. And they were able to pull it off by just doing the small things, getting a couple late rebounds, hitting their free throws. It became a free throw game the final 40 seconds or so, and Malik Monk hit his couple free throws. Ja Morant had a chance to tie the game. He got fouled on a 3 by Bazemore, and he missed one of his free throws, and that kind of swung things in the Lakers' favor. So give Lakers credit. They were able to win a close game. They were able to play the free throw game and pull it off, and they won 121-118. So you'll take that win. It was definitely Russell Westbrook's best game. He got a little bit better in the Suns game, but so much went bad in that Suns game that it wasn't really an afterthought, but it was like the third story beat of a few story beats on that game. So at least Russ got a little bit of, attention off of him. And in this game against the Grizzlies, Russ was really, really good. 13 points, 13 assists, 7 rebounds. He had the first 4 assists for the Lakers in the game. He was just the only reason anyone was scoring. It was fantastic. It was great to see him play and great to see him be effective in different ways other than just attack the rim. We know he can do so many other things, and today's a great example of that. He can dominate a game without scoring. It's very, very rare for any player to say that. I can only think of maybe 5 players ever who I can say can dominate a game without scoring. And the ones that come to mind right away is Jason Kidd, maybe Magic at times, and then I'd have to think about defense specialists like Dennis Rodman or something. It's really rare because it's such a scoring focused game that for you to be dominant in a different way is truly special. Someone who was dominant in a traditional way, and it was special, was Carmelo Anthony. My goodness, he had a game. I don't know if he'll ever have a game this good in a Lakers uniform. If he has a game better than this, he had a really good game coming up. But he had 28 points in 28 minutes, 10 for 15 from the field, 6 for 8 from 3. My goodness, Melo. I mean, what a burst of energy. He scored 28 points. He passed Moses Malone. He's the 9th highest scoring player of all time in NBA history. He did that in the middle of the game. Didn't even get a chance to really get his flowers for that because it was in the middle of a run, and the play didn't really stop. It just kind of kept going. The Lakers did a nice tribute for him at Staples Center. They did a little video during like one of the timeouts, which was really nice to see. But he was just fantastic. He was amazing. He was incredible. And one thing I love about Melo is whenever he comes in, the crowd goes crazy. They love Melo. They've been wanting Melo in the Lakers uniform for, 7-8 years or something like that. And it's finally happened. And they're making up for lost time. Lakers Nation instantly loves him. When he hits a 3, the crowd erupts in a way I only hear them erupt when LeBron dunks. That's the only thing that gets that kind of energy in Staples Center in the middle of a game. It's a LeBron James dunk or a Carmelo 3. He hits that 3. He puts a little three taps on his head with his 3 fingers up there, and the crowd goes crazy. They love it. And the roof just explodes off Staples Center. It's so great to hear, so great to see, and he deserves it. He played really well. The first 2 games, he was very, very bad defensively. He was getting targeted. He was getting switched on constantly, and he was just, chicken nuggets out there. They were just eating him up. And it was great to see him kind of, get away from that. I think the Lakers sent help a couple times and trapped whoever was trying to do that. And they had a few strategies to kind of avoid him getting exposed that way on the defensive side of the ball. And then he was balling on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, you can't expect him to go 10 for 15, 6 for 8 from 3 every night. But you can't expect him to make buckets. One thing Melo does is make buckets. And he's been doing that in all 3 games. And in Game 3 here against the Grizzlies, it was the perfect version of that, where he wasn't being taken off the court because of his defensive miscues, and then he was, on high level shooting efficiency, playing incredible. So got to give Melo his flowers. He won this game. Without Carmelo Anthony playing out of his mind, the Lakers probably do lose this game. They barely won it with him playing out of his mind. So you got to give props to Melo. Melo's a legend. There's not much else to say about Carmelo. He's accomplished everything in his career except win a championship. And the Lakers and Melo are working hard to amend that this year. So props to Melo. He's the player of the game. He was the best player on the court. He had himself a night, and it was great to see. All right, so before we get into the games coming up this week, I want to do a brief update on the South Bay Lakers. For those who don't know, the South Bay Lakers are the Lakers G League team. You can kind of think of it as like a minor league team, if that kind of helps your brain. And it's good to look at that because the Lakers are one of the teams that actually develops their talent really well. And I think looking at the G League, those are some players you are going to see at a certain point somewhere down the line with the Lakers. 2 of them are on 2-way contracts, and a few of them are names you might know from training camp or from Summer League. So I want to go through. The Lakers have already done the G League draft, the South Bay Lakers have, and they have their training camp roster ready. So I want to read it to you, and then I kind of just highlight a couple players to keep your eye on. One thing I want to do this season is focus a little bit more on the G League. The Lakers, again, they've been notorious for the development of their players from the drafted, undrafted, second round pickups, things of that nature. They've really hit on those players the last 7-8 years in an incredible way that I don't think any other organization has done. in terms of, from top picks to bottom picks to undrafted. They've done an incredible job. So I want to keep an eye on what's going on with the G League Lakers, because I have a feeling a few of those players will play significant minutes at some point with the main Lakers team. So here's the training camp roster. We have Paris Bates. We have Chaundi Brown Jr., who played with the team during training camp. Elijah Kane. Sekou Doumbouya, who's on the two-way contract. Jay Huff, who's on a two-way contract. Andre Ingram, the OG, who you might remember a couple years back when he had that incredible regular season game. T. Kennedy, Frank Mason III, Mac McClung, who also played with the Lakers in Summer League and was part of the training camp roster. Nick Norton, Cam Oliver, another training camp player. Nate Pierre-Louis, Deshaun Smith, and Cameron Young. So there's a couple players there. Obviously, the two-way players are Jay Huff and Doumbouya, and you have the other players who were part of the Lakers training camp this year in Brown Jr. and McClung. So yeah, I'll definitely be watching some more G League. I'll be watching a lot more G League. I'll be trying to go to some of the games and try to do a little bit more coverage, because I think they're a team and a roster you need to keep your eye on as a Laker fan, because I think at a certain point their stories will be told with the main team. So I'm really excited about that. And here, just really quickly going to go over some of the games coming up for the G League Lakers. Their regular season starts on November 5th, and they play the G League Ignite. And November 17th, they also play the G League Ignite. And then on Saturday, November 20th, they play the Oklahoma City Blues. So you can check out their schedule on southbay.gleague.nba.com/schedule. And like I said, I'm planning on going out to a few of the games there. I'm going to see if I can do a little bit more coverage, and I'll probably write a feature article on the first month of the G League season and how the players look, and kind of take a Lakers perspective. There's the two-way players, if they're going to be down there during that moment, and then some of those training camp guys. And does anyone else stand out as a potential, NBA Lakers player on the G League? I think every year, like I said, there have been players from that group that have, made the jump and have played with the Lakers. So I'm going to keep an eye on that, and I think you should too if you're interested in this team, which I'm assuming you are because you're listening to the podcast. So I'll keep you guys up to date on it. I'll keep you all up to date on it, and just something to pay attention to as we go along in this calendar season. All right, so the Lakers have 4 games this week, so it's kind of a packed week. The most packed week I saw last year was 5 games, which is ridiculous. So we got 4 here, so it's a little busy, but I think it's manageable. The Lakers have their first game of the week against the San Antonio Spurs. They're going to be at San Antonio on Tuesday at 5:30 PT. So again, that's a bit of an earlier game. It's not an evening game, but it's against San Antonio. So we're going to see how good San Antonio is. They're kind of in a transition phase, but Pop always makes those players play hard and play his way. So I'm guessing it'll be a Lakers win, but a tough matchup. The next night, again, a back-to-back. They're at Oklahoma City, and they play again another early game at 5. This one, personally, I'm a little worried about. It feels like a trap game to me because it's a back-to-back. It's the first back-to-back, and then Oklahoma City is not considered a good team. But again, on a back-to-back, I can see the Lakers kind of, falling asleep at the wheel here and losing that game. So hopefully they don't, but I'm a little worried that one of these 2 games here on the first back-to-back of the year, they might let slip. It's tough to win back-to-back games, which is what the Grizzlies were trying to do last night, beating the Lakers and then the Clippers and the Lakers on back-to-back nights. So we'll see what happens with the Lakers there. And then on Friday, the Lakers are back home. They're playing the Cavs. That's a 7:30 game. So I think that'll be a win. Again, the Lakers' schedule gets a little kinder here. These aren't teams that are expected to make a lot of noise. So hopefully the Lakers can figure out what they need to do with their roster and how their roster is going to work out with the depth chart and things of that nature in these games where you got a little bit of wiggle room, maybe a little bit more room for error than you do against the Warriors and the Suns. And the final game of the week, it's Rockets-Lakers on Sunday, 7:30. Again, another team that the Lakers should win, should take care of business against. They'll be playing at home, which is another positive, and it's another 7:30 game. So I like the late Sunday games. Those matinees never work out too good on Sundays, so I'm glad they're playing later. And hopefully this week sees a lot of Lakers wins. This is a great week for them to play teams that are kind of not considered playoff caliber teams and win some of these games and figure out their rotations. Again, people have been upset with the starting lineup. It's been the same starting 5 all season: AD, DJ, LeBron, Bazemore, and Russ. People do not like that lineup. We'll see what Frank Vogel thinks, because ultimately it's his job and it's his role to figure that out. And we'll see what that looks like, and we'll continue to look at what happens with the depth chart. Who's the first players off the bench? Is it Monk? Is it Melo? Melo had another great game. Monk's had some pretty good games. I mentioned his basically game-sealing free throws that he hit. So it'll still be interesting to see the way the rest of the lineup kind of develops. And we'll see what happens with Kendrick Nunn when he can come back. We know THT's gone for a while. So they're also trying to play with a few pieces missing. But we also know that's the NBA. You never know when there's injuries. You may never have your team fully healthy. We just don't know. We're hoping for it. I think we will. But it's definitely going to take a while. And it's definitely not something that's promised. So the season started. We're underway. These are the players available. Let's find a way to optimize everyone. Let's find a way to continue getting Russ to improve and be his best self in this Lakers roster. And let's hope for some Lakers wins this week. That's what we all want. So let's see if the Lakers can get on a nice winning streak here, win the majority of their games, and get off to a good start here early in the season. All right, that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be here talking Lakers next week. Have a good rest of your day, and go Lakers.